Sounds good.
All right, gentlemen, you may start whenever you would like. Looks like Jeanette is now joined into the meeting. She is muted for now. And most everyone that joins the meeting will be muted. So if you have a question for someone or if they want to comment, they'll need to unmute themselves. Okay.
Sounds good. Well, yeah. Well, thanks, Stacy, for your time and for setting up this meeting for us this evening. You know, since we met a week or so ago, you know, we took notes, and Scott and I put our heads together and put together what we. Sorry, I laughed when I saw your new face, Stacy. Caught me off guard. I like the pipe. But we put our heads together and put together and sent over what we thought you know, really addressed the concerns that you raised. And Ron, I know I said that I was going to share my screen, but why don't you pull it up, and I can we can both kind of narrate together, just to go through the you know, the revisions that were made, you know, since the last meeting. I think you are on mute too, Ron.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. All right. Can you?
Yeah, so why don't we just go down to, I mean, really the page that shows the changes. And I guess what we could go ahead and start with, why don't we start with parking? Because I know that was kind of everybody's biggest, it was kind of the biggest conversation piece. So let's start there, and then we can come back to kind of the active use questions, and then the street trees, which was just a question that Rachel had for us. So yeah, on this next page here, we can just walk through this. I know, Stacy, you've already had a chance to look at it, but we can just do a quick sort of overview. So what we've done here is put together really two separate scenarios that show, you know, on one hand, what the parking requirements would look like in the event we have a really, really big retail tenant, which would, you know, likely be a restaurant where it's this large, and what those required spaces are for just the restaurant. And then that kind of shows us, we're able to back into the remaining residential spaces that would be available to us, which would then, I guess, in turn determines the residential density that we have. So on this sort of commercial heavy scenario, we're showing 1,000 square feet of restaurant space, which per code requires 1 parking. What was that, Ron?
10,000.
10,000. Okay, I'm sorry. Forgive me. So which is 1 parking spot per 100 gross square feet, which would require 100 spaces. So that's sort of one. That's the, you know, on the heaviest end, you know, what we would anticipate here for this site. So in that context, you know, given the total amount of parking that's available on the site, you know, we would only have, and there's actually an error here, Ron. So 180 plus 54 is not 334.
Yeah, I think that was totaling up with the 100. So yeah, 234 for the residential. I can make another line there.
Okay, yeah, so it's 234 for the residential. There we go. Okay, so that makes sense. With 334 spaces being the total amount of parking that the site will support. And so this is a scenario that, you know, meets Metro's requirements and is, again, on sort of the far, you know, the far end of the spectrum in terms of, you know, intensity with commercial space. On the other end of the spectrum, we're showing what it would look like for a general retail space, maybe dry goods, something to that effect, that had 2,000 gross square footage. Here, this parking requirement is 1 spot per 200 of gross square feet, which would result in a requirement of 10 parking spots. This in turn really would determine the the spots available to for residential, and what that then allows us in terms of residential density. So here that would be 270 units. And so again, this is on the light end of the spectrum, and really probably closer to the reality of what we would see here. So Stacy, I know this was really, your big question. You want to fire away with any questions you have, or can Ron and I clarify anything for you on this?
Well, my concern, as I have stated several times, is accommodating for visitor parking, accommodating for loading and unloading, and accommodating for like rideshare. And I understand I've had some emails back and forth with Amelia at planning. And I understand the idea that you're allocating X number of spaces to residential, which should also include things like for visitors coming in and visiting, and for rideshare to be able to park, handicap spots, things of that nature. I guess what I've wanted all along is just to say, okay, we are going to dedicate out of that 234, for instance, in that first scenario, we're going to allocate X number of visitor spots at each building. It's still part of the collective amount, but I just want to have definitive space that is allocated to those particular uses.
Okay.
That has been always my concern. It's not, okay, you need 234 spaces, I want you to create an additional 10 spaces to accommodate that. I just want to know that you're allocating per building space these spots. And since last Monday's meetings, I've also gotten concerned about the clubhouse. If people are going to be able to rent the clubhouse and have an event there, where does that extra parking come into play for an event at the clubhouse, if that's going to be even something they can do?
Sure. Yeah. So, on the latter question, I'll give you a quick answer there. So we will have occupancy restrictions, which are largely determined by fire safety for any club space. And so that will really drive sort of the usage there. But again, as far as a specific parking set aside for when we if we were to allow someone else to use the space or to rent it out, they would typically just use the space that's available on the parking lot itself. And then, in terms of visitor parking, and I think maybe we did mention this, but we will have just a few visitor parking spaces available for the for prospective tenants to use while they're sort of touring the facility. But I've never really seen dedicated spaces for visitors at specific buildings before. Ron, you guys do this a lot. I do this quite a bit, but you guys have done more projects than I have. Have you ever had dedicated visitor parking for specific buildings in sort of a garden style apartment community?
Usually it's just, we would place it at the leasing office. We don't usually or ever put it on just a normal residential building. It's kind of baked into the parking calculations.
Yeah. And so, and Stacey, just from an operational perspective, like that's typically what we assume, right? Is that it is, because, on any given day, not everyone's going to be there, right? And at any given day, we're not going to be 100% occupied. And so now all this is taken into consideration when Metro sets their parking, minimums. And so, that's really what's going to drive, the availability.
I can appreciate that, Bo. I think I've made my, I hope I've made my concerns clear. It's not so much a what's going on during the day situation, it's a what's going on at night situation. Because if you've got most of your residents there and you have, a handful of people come over to visit, and you've got a restaurant that's really popular and all of the dedicated restaurant spaces are being occupied as well, or they may not even be dedicated. They're just parking wherever they can willy-nilly to get there. The overflow into the neighborhood and the overflow into the other the other property owners, like the potential for Uptown Fruit Market or parking happening in the motel, because, oh my gosh, there's like empty parking spaces there and it's right next door to where I'm walking. That's the big concern. This project should not have that kind of overflow impact. And as long as we attempt to make accommodations for that, that's all I'm wanting to see from you guys, that you're paying attention to that concern. Now, I don't know if this particular drawing, Ron, is that your screen? Could you zoom back out just a little bit? Because I don't know if these buildings are drawn to scale. And I doubt
they're not.
But here's my big concern. You take a look at the space that looks like it's indicated for parking, okay, the little lots and such. And then if you scroll up the screen just a little bit and you look at the parking lot that Uptown Flats has, okay, I counted, there's 111 spaces in that lot. Okay, and I don't know how many units they are, or what the bedroom allocation is per different type of unit, but that's 111 spaces in that lot. And looking at the layout of the buildings and such, the approximate count that Scott had given us last Monday was that based on what you guys are anticipating for building size to accommodate for drive lanes, and the medians or whatever between parking spaces, if you're going to have anything like what they show up above. And there's one that's around building C and building D. No, building C. There's one there. I mean, there's only supposed to be space for 321, but yet we're still seeing 334 as the total. I don't understand the scale, and I don't understand why you're reticent to say of this 234 or of this 324, we're going to have X number for visitors, we're going to have X number for handicap, we're going to have X number for ride share, and maybe some of those need to be spread out amongst the buildings, because I know if you've got a dedicated ride share space and it's down at building C, for instance, someone from building B is not going to want to walk all the way down there to be able to catch the ride share. They're just going to, expect them to pull up on the street, which is what we don't want to have happen.
Sure. Yeah, so I will say it's certainly not drawn to scale. It's a hand sketch. And just with where we are, in the process, we haven't had a chance to actually, draw things to scale yet. So that would certainly come later. And I really don't, I think from a handicap parking perspective, so we will have a minimum requirement that, Public Works has for us. And so we'll have to meet that requirement in order to get our certificate of occupancy. They wouldn't, they would not allow us to open without those spots set aside. And then with ride share, I mean, we will have sort of a visitor, visitor spaces around the club where, occupants from building D, could meet their ride share. They're, with building C, D, C, B, A, and E, though, there will, we don't necessarily have that planned. But again, like having done this, several times now. And Ron, I'm interested to hear what you guys have done for similar deals. Like, do you typically have dedicated rideshare for each building like this, or is it in one central location?
Depending on the property, I think each case is a little bit different, but we have in some of the plans dedicated or shown in the plan, like this could be a spot for rideshare. So it could be as simple as labeling, some of the spaces. Typically the rideshare drop-off zones are more allocated towards the street, like where you might have parallel parking or like a valet zone, for instance. That's another thing that we might note. But yeah, they usually are concentrated around those kind of commercial activities or the kind of main entrances to the building.
Sure.
Well, I've stated my concerns with parking, and I know that's been a contentious issue with us for a while now. Again, not wanting to beat a dead horse because I may be fighting an uphill battle here, but I'll get off the parking soapbox so that some of my other neighbors may make comments on what may or may not, or if they have any questions on this particular project, especially if they've not been able to attend some of our previous meetings.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess I'll just say in closing, it's the parking, the visitor parking is inherently included in our parking requirements for both residential and commercial. And further, like we will provide the necessary space for rideshare, loading and unloading, but really based on the individual tenants, the commercial tenants' need once we have them. And again, I'll say that everything will comply with Metro requirements on this. And so happy to circle back, Stacy, if you want, but Quinn, I guess we can also address other other items as well now. Did you want us to keep moving through the list, or?
It's entirely up to you. You had just asked about my views on parking, if they've changed or such, and I provided them. So. Okay.
Well.
I was just gonna say, no, we appreciate the feedback because we've been trying, our part of our job is to incorporate the feedback of all different stakeholders. So as we started with the Highland Heights master plan, and we had the cut through street, that the connection to Luton, and then the massing kind of got spread out so that we could allocate parking appropriately to each one of those buildings. So there is a lot of history and conversation that got us to the point we're at now, because we did look at various iterations of this plan with different street connections, diagonal streets and cut throughs, and reducing the 5 buildings down to 3 in certain situations. And by spreading out the massing, it actually costs us more money to build it, to build 5 buildings instead of 3. But part of that was driven by parking, so that we could allocate the spaces close enough to the building so that people didn't have that long walk that we were talking to too. We were referencing earlier as well. So, and the rideshare thing too is a great point, because, we also, it's gonna be important to us too, that the residents in residents of the neighborhood and in this development have a good experience with that too. And it's everything seems to be flowing on our property too, so that I think our interests are definitely aligned there to make sure that we have a safe place that works logistically for everybody, including the residents too, not just the neighborhood. So, and that it's going to evolve, where that location goes and how we can work it out, and
Yeah, and if I can jump in here for just a second, this is Sean Parker. I actually had a meeting with a bunch of public works folks. I guess it was maybe 10 days ago. Specifically, the rideshare issue, both in this development and others. We really, it's something that we're very aware of, and that departments are starting to take a closer look at as they approve final site plans and whatnot. But there's not like a clear answer that I'm aware of that we could put I can't think of any way to put that in the SP, because again, if Sean Brock opens a restaurant here and it's super popular and we got people from all over the county coming, obviously the rideshare requirements are going to be very, very different from if it's a clothing store or something that's more like neighborhood oriented. So it is something that Public Works is starting to take a much closer look at as these projects advance to the final site plan phase. But we basically, I don't know of anything that we can put in there that would, say, oh, well, we're going to solve it. It's also something that we haven't, like policy wise, really addressed at the metro level. So, I mean, that's something that I continue to be in contact with Public Works people about. And that's something that, like as a project like this is moving toward, final site approval and whatnot, I would be kind of following up with departments to just make sure that those things we talked about are being considered and things like that. So I know that's not a ton of assurance, but it's something that we're working on at the metro level and kind of trying to come up with a better approach for. But I mean, I think that with this project specifically, I think that, it sounds like y'all are thinking about it too. And like you'll be planning for that activity and the sort of varying degrees with which it might occur based on the final configuration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My biggest thing, and I've expressed this for project after project on Dickerson as we push the access off of Dickerson, my biggest thing is I just don't want rideshare vehicles stopping on Dickerson. I think that's extraordinarily unsafe. And I think that initially Public Works was not going to allow any access on Dickerson for this project. I actually think that they did agree to let you do the shared access with the southern property there on Dickerson. I think that's going to alleviate a lot of what I would consider dangerous concern about the rideshare stopping right in the middle of the street, because they will have that clear access on Dickerson. And especially if there's good signage that points them through to some area they can turn around easy, stuff like that. Like I think it's that we have access on Dickerson gives me a little bit more comfort with that issue specifically. Whereas some of these other projects on Dickerson where we've seen like a mid-block multifamily development and they're saying we're going to push access completely to the alley and that's going to require 2 or 3 turns for every Uber driver to find. That gives me a lot more pause than this, where we actually have the access on Dickerson, because I think it's going to be apparent to these rideshare drivers that at least they need to get in there and not just stop in the street. So that's kind of where I'm at on the rideshare stuff on my end.
Got it.
Makes sense.
Well, so I guess, we talked about, we talked about sort of the active use commitment. And here, we are showing a 2,000 gross square footage for non-residential active use along the Dickerson frontage. Councilman Barker, that was something that we discussed at the last, when we met at Goodwood last week. So that's shown in the SP now. Is there any follow-up on that from what Scott sent over?
On the active use along Dickerson, I mean, if let's look at the stacks on Main, for example. They do have, I don't know if everyone's been in that building, but, if you walk past it on the sidewalk, it really doesn't have that like active, it doesn't have that feel of on like along Main Street of like an activated space. Like there's no obvious thing that you might walk into and shop or eat or do anything like that. But, they do have office and the gym, the recreational facilities there. So, I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is like, is there anything here that's going to say like, for the active use space that it would for lack of a better word, be approachable by pedestrians rather than just being like a frontage that happens to have exercise equipment in it. For lack of a better way to phrase that question, that's how I'm asking it.
Sure. No. I wish I had a great answer for you, and I wish I knew who that tenant was, and that I could plan and build the building around them. But it's just so tough to do that. Especially given, I know Scott Morton mentioned this the last time we met, where there's just so much retail space like this along Dickerson Pike that's readily available. It's a tough question for us to answer now. But I mean, it is, I think having an active use and having it be a space that is approachable is important to us. I think all these non-residential uses, I think we'll do a great job of doing that.
So one thing I do have a question about, this is Stacy. We had in early discussions talked about restricting a use for competitive uses that would be competing with Uptown Fruit Market. Is that something that can be itemized or restricted in this SP? And then if at any point in the future Uptown Fruit Market closes up and goes away, that's something that could potentially be revised. But I just didn't know if that was something that we could put into the SP to help protect those neighbors that have been there for so long.
Sure. Yeah. So I will say this: Uptown Fruit Market is an icon, and we would never be able to compete with them, even if there was any kind of grocery stores in it. But I've actually, so Rashid, the owner of the Uptown Fruit Market, actually, sent in a letter of support for the project. And so I know he's looking forward to the density that will come along with this, and the additional, users for him. And I guess my concern is just how would we, if that's something that both he and you wanted to see, it's like, what kind of language is that? So, I mean, I think on the surface it's straightforward, but like, would we, I don't know, what if we had some kind of small, dry goods store that also sold drinks or sold, had some kind of retail component that had crossover with what the fruit market does? I think that's where that
the
gets kind of
classification
complicated.
of that business would be something else, generally speaking, than grocery store. If let's just say, for instance, an electronics shop moved in, or a repair shop, and they wanted to sell sodas so that their staff and people that visited, that's not a competing industry. That's not a competing within the same industry. But a greengrocer that was selling fresh vegetables would be a competing. And, it's far be it from anybody to say that moving into a particular place is a good judgment call or not, if they want to do that. But at the same token, by the same token, that would then erode some of Uptown Fruit Market, because it's easier to go downstairs if you're living in Building C than it is to walk half a block. And if there is a way, and if there is a possibility to restrict a competing business from using that space in that pursuit of a business, I would like to see that language in there. But that's pie in the sky kind of stuff. It would be nice. And I think that Rashid at Uptown Fruit Market would appreciate at least the intention of that.
Okay. Well, tell you what, let Scott, Ron, and I, and Jamie and I think on that and see if there's something we could propose that, I guess accomplishes that.
Yeah, that's.
This is Ray Sovereign. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Ray.
Hi. I'll wait till it's my turn. Go ahead and finish, Stacy.
So I'm pretty much done what I was going to say. Bo, you were responding, so.
Go ahead. Okay. I'm sorry I hadn't been on these earlier, but, life and COVID gets in the way. So one of the things I wanted to admire very much is that this looks a lot like plans for builds that are like condos. You know, you rent them out and you're in the, they create an environment around you. And that's what this seems like, because one of the things it does is it is dumping the majority of the traffic out into my neighborhood. I live a couple blocks from this place. So there's already like 400 and some units going on up the street from us. They haven't quite sure what they're going to do with that traffic. And there's going to be another big build farther even up towards Trinity. So all this is an incredible amount of traffic and cars and lack of infrastructure for transit that I think is for Dickerson, and having done the charrette for the very long-term plan, it's going to be, unless there's some other kind of rail system or traffic system or something put in here, these neighborhoods are going to be impassable for the people that live there. They just, you know, I wait now at a corner when a while back, I didn't wait, you know, in the middle at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I could go right out. Now I'm waiting sometimes 3 or 4 minutes to be able to get out on my street, Lishy and Trinity. And this is on the, a little farther down, but it's still going to be, I'm just saying that you all are talking like people that are going to go do ride shares. There's going to be a significant amount of ride share. So people won't even use their cars. They'll be able to get downtown. You have to build the cultural infrastructure for that to happen that matches what you want to do with this property, which is going to put an incredible amount of traffic, incredible amount of people in a very small area. In a quarter-mile place in the next year, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new rental units. We hope that that's, because this is like ripe pickings for being a sort of resort to Nashville with all of its little stores and stuff downtown. I just want somebody to comment on, I appreciate the vision that you have and the way that you think people are going to live, and that may be very well, and it's going to be. You know, for the generation that's coming up now, this is going to be their living, and I get that. But it also sets up culturally something that I think is a little more difficult for a place that's trying to create neighborhood or trying to retain neighborhood and connections with neighborhoods and the people that live there. So.
Sure. No, great. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for your comments. And I guess first I'll touch on, I guess, the traffic concern. And so, you know, as part of this development that we've, as part of the SP, you know, we were required to put together a traffic impact study, which was where we, commissioned a study that sought to determine the additional traffic that will be put onto both Dickerson Pike and Gatewood Avenue. And we had to work with Public Works to make sure that, you know, everything that is proposed here in the current, traffic patterns are, accommodate what we're hoping to put here. And that the answer was yes. And so, I do think, I do hear what you're saying, and with new development comes new traffic. I mean, I think the part of the Highland Heights neighborhood, Highland Heights study, as well as the South Dickerson corridor study, was, there was an emphasis put on creating density along these major corridors to sort of get it out of the neighborhoods and onto with quicker access to, again,
but
to the main corridors. That included the traffic from it too, not just the buildings, but the traffic as well. Sure.
If I could interrupt for just a second, Bo, I think the silver lining here, Ray, is that the vast majority of people, especially if they have to go anywhere other than downtown, will want to get to 65 or Ellington as quick as possible. So whether they come out at Gatewood and turn left and then turn right onto Dickerson, or they come out on that driveway just south of Building C, they're going to turn right on Dickerson. That's their fastest way to get to the light, to get them either to Ellington or to 65. So at least they're building on this side of the street, and that will help alleviate some of the traffic going through the neighborhood, because even traffic going through the neighborhood will have to go at a slower rate of speed, and they have many more stops that they have to deal with to negotiate getting to where they need to go.
Well,
Plus,
there's on
right,
Gatewood, there's at that particular point when you get up there, if you've driven it, it's difficult to see in both directions. That's at the crest of the hill.
right, I know,
That part, and then it goes down, you know, then it goes down when it comes towards my side of the street.
right. But I mean, you know, looking at a traffic flow and thinking like people that are wanting to get somewhere faster, that is one of the saving graces of the location of this, is that it will be, you know, a right turn from either exit, basically, to get to that major intersection, to get to either 65 or to Ellington. Now, at some point, I'm sure they're going to need to look at, and this may be the city looking at it, as opposed to, I don't think these developers would be involved in it, but there would probably need, have a need for an what am I thinking of? A
Right?
stoplight at the intersection of Gatewood and Dickerson.
Okay.
But that may come as the traffic increases, depending on how many people are trying to turn left at different times of day and such. But just
I
an
also had
FYI,
one more concern, because do you have in your files there, do you have something that shows the water, where the water goes on that land? Because there's about 3 distribution channels that go underneath all of this area that go down to get to the river, you know. And I haven't seen that. I know that really created a problem. And you're right in that path that started in my neighborhood where they couldn't build on these properties because underneath was a tributary. And I know this area has problems when it rains. It gets really damp down there. It gets really, you know, the water goes down and sort of stays down in that corner. And I just wondered if you had something that could show where that is and how it's going to be mitigated.
No, absolutely. And that's a great question, because you know, anytime you do a project like this, there's a lot of impervious surface that's created, which causes, you know, increased runoff. And so, you know, finding a place to, you know, finding a way to slow down that water, treat that water, and then ultimately get it, you know, in the right place, which is not in people's yards and not in people's driveway, is one of the biggest, you know, challenges that developers like us face. And so the, you know, the stormwater plans and the infrastructure that we proposed are, you know, are adequate for addressing the runoff that we're creating.
Yeah, that's great. That's adequate. It can't be just adequate, because are they putting all the pieces together from the other builds and things like that?
So I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's a piece to a larger puzzle with the stormwater and the traffic as well too. But I think Bo will tell you if I accidentally said adequate, because the infrastructure that we're going to be required to put in is also going to be sized in a way that the future development of the neighborhood is going to actually benefit from as well. That they're thinking through about what the future demands are, not just for our site. So that's, you know, that's included in their calculation too. So whoever develops around us in the future is going to benefit from, you know, our work a lot with the street for circulation and stormwater as well. So,
Ron, wasn't there a slide or one of these that had a little more detail that showed the retention areas and such? It was one that
yeah, so that's
further down.
I showed you that. So that's something the civil engineer put together that which I can share that now if you guys want to
it's not in this packet. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, and it wouldn't be submitted to planning. It's more of a public works you know, question. But again, I'm happy to walk through to show everybody what the stormwater that we have you know, proposed.
Yeah, if you like, Bo, I think that would help. Ray and others to understand. And Ray, if you recall, back last year or towards the end of the year before, John Honeysucker came to one of our neighborhood meetings and talked about all the requirements for stormwater and runoff mitigation when we were talking about Myron's build, and you know, he was emphatic that he's going to hold developers' feet to the fire when it comes to making sure that little, if any, runoff is going to change neighborhoods drastically, or impact them, I should say.
Sure.
Okay.
I think when Public Work does those calculations now, they have a factor to help future-proof future development. You know, they're not thinking about what we need on our site. They're thinking about what the neighborhood's going to need years down the road.
And we're just now seeing the larger of the developments come to fruition, and they're installing stormwater and drainage ditches and all that. We just haven't been able to see the impact yet because they're still in construction.
Sure. So Stacy, I mean, I have the infrastructure sort of tabs pulled up. If you want to, I guess, can I
you should
share
be
my
able to
screen?
share the screen. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take over for a second. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
It looks good.
All right. So I guess one thing to highlight are that the system we'll be using will have a lot of permeable pavers. So here you see these where in the parking lot, all of this will be a permeable surface, which helps with the runoff as well as looks a lot better than asphalt. In addition to the permeable paver solution, we're also making significant investments in just stormwater infrastructure, and really that's in the form of just these runoff pipes. So here you'll see along here, this is all 36-inch pipe that collects the water from around the site, goes up through here, there, and then up to Gatewood. Which is a collection point for, which collects all the stormwater. This will ultimately be dedicated to Metro. It'll be in public right of way, as will this. And really, I mean, I'm sorry, as will all of this will be dedicated because this street actually right here is actually will become dedicated right of way to the city. So these are all improvements that we're making, really off of our property, but in doing so to address stormwater requirements and reduce, the pooling and flooding that you might see in other areas around the neighborhood. And then this actually shows the other utilities not pertaining to stormwater, but. Ray, does that answer your question better?
Yes, it did. Thanks a lot. I would just love you to go talk to the other two builds. I know that you have to collect it and you have to treat it. You can't in order to release it out. But I'm just thinking that all those builds in that area, and that's all, floodplain. That's where all the water comes down and goes underground and then over the ground and everything else. It's just,
Sure.
It's going to be fun to see what it does, Because while you're
Ray,
addressing yours, you can't address the rest of it that's going to come downhill at you. So.
Sure. So, I mean, again, like this, what Public Works is taking is a regional approach, and Jamie said this better than I did, but they're making sure that the improvements we're making are going to address this neighborhood, really address this issue neighborhood-wide. And so, one of the problems with, or one of the issues with the infrastructure along Dickerson Pike is there's just not any, right? There is no stormwater, and it's developments like these that will modernize that. Which
we had a giant creek
the
that used to run down there. There's huge culverts where that would just run down to the creek, and then away it would go. But
now, Bo, on this, and I don't see it. It's not very easy to see it anyway. But I believe I recall seeing a couple of retention areas. Like there's some pipes that kind of start in the middle of a parking lot and run to the main pipe going up the Luton extension. There's another couple on the right-hand side of the development that do the same thing. That's where your retention areas are going to be for collection of that before it runs to the pipe, correct?
Right, because it has to be treated.
Correct. Yeah. And Ron, maybe I'll stop sharing and we can go back to Ron because he's got that picture. And he can zoom in on that.
Hey, I wanted to chime in if I could, a question about, not to shift gears. I think we can all agree. I think this project is going to be a great improvement compared to the current water runoff situation that's in that neighborhood right now. But I wanted to ask, are there any plans or hopes for plans for any additional lights? It looks like this, Gatewood's going to receive a surplus, a huge influx of traffic. And it looks like there's going to be another road over here on the southwest corner. But is there any idea if there's going to be any implementation of lights in that area?
In a lot in this development and a lot of others we work on, I wish that I got to make the decision whether or not that new stoplights got added. But that is a luxury that developers are not given. So that is entirely driven by Public Works. Now, if they wanted to see a light here, they would have told us, and they would have made us fund it. But that's not something that they wanted to see. And again, what's driving that is they don't think that it's necessary yet. Now, I know Stacy said earlier that on down the line, if it creates an issue, then that's something that they will put in or will require. But right now, it was not something they wanted to see.
Understood. I'm assuming you were mentioning for traffic signal, stoplight type things, and not just general lighting, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Road lighting for
okay.
signals.
All right.
Yeah.
Is this property going to be gated?
No, it will not be gated. So this connector is actually going to be a public street, and so we can't gate a public street. And I guess, I think maybe if we wanted to, we could put a gate on the sort of southwest, entrance. We wouldn't do that, and I really think it's just that Public Works would say either you can do it or you can't do it.
Oh, really?
There's no real negotiating there.
A gated neighborhood?
There is no provisions for any kind of gated community build or complex or something like that. All of the ones that are currently going up are prohibited from having it as a gated community because they do have street through plans and such. Same thing with this one, same thing with Myron's, same thing with Meridian Park. None of them can have gated any type of restrictions for folks to be able to drive through on these streets.
Okay. Yeah, it was not our intent, and so I actually wasn't as familiar with that. But there you go. Well, we wouldn't do it anyway.
Yeah, just ask the people down at Riverfront that have had issues with gates.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So while that we have this map pulled up, is this a good time to ask a question?
No, Andrew, you have to wait until we're done. I'm just
okay.
kidding.
My bad. I'll hang out.
No, go ahead.
So I've been listening quietly. Sorry, I was about 5 minutes late. So if you guys already addressed this, just let me know. I know everybody sort of has their pet concern that they really want to talk about, and this is mine. It's really in relations to Building B and Building E more than anything else. And that is necessarily the height of these and how the grade relates to the height of these buildings. I come at this from the perspective of somebody who walks down Meridian every day and loves all the historic properties that we have there. Lots of, early 1920s craftsman homes, things like that. And it would be, a shame if all of a sudden in the background you have, 30 feet in the air, some behemoth building. So do we know how the grade actually relates to what's around it and how these 4-story buildings will really poke out? As far as what it relates to, I know how it relates to Gatewood, but do we know how that relates to Meridian?
To Meridian? To Luton?
Meridian. So that would be, yes, if you look at your site. So there are those 4 or 5 properties there. And I know a few of those people, they're not on the call right now, but they've definitely been curious about it. Well, because I know you have the parking against your property right now, which I like. It's better than I think one draft I saw where building E was smack up against your property line. And I went, oh boy, you know, you're basically going to have building E and a landscape buffer, but now you've got parking around it, which I assume that's probably about 75 feet of parking. But do we really, or is it too early in the process to know exactly how building E will relate to everything around it as far as height goes?
Yeah, no, not too early to talk about this at all. And thank you for that question. And this is actually, I mean, this is a really, really, you know, important question that planning always has, especially as it pertains to, you know, the policy that was put in place to really drive development. And, you know, Ron, you might can speak better to the specifics with regards to setbacks and whatnot.
So yes, we do have I think a 20-foot setback, and plus we're doing the landscape buffer because there's a different zone up until this dotted line here, this District 1 and District 2. This is also pretty intensive collection for stormwater. So there's quite a bit of green space that does provide that buffer between building E alongside that parking bay. We could probably add to the section a little bit, but it is a pretty good distance between these houses and building E.
Yeah, because the road you're mentioning right beneath it, Meridian Court, I mean, that's just going to be tough any way you cut it.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that's part of development, and I'm not as worried about necessarily that as Meridian Street proper. Because like I know obviously on Dickerson you're going to be doing 6 stories, of course, that's a different district. But for what with resides sort of in truly the Highland Heights, I guess, plan, that's where I'm more a little bit concerned about building height and how it relates to the surrounding area. Because really that's sort of my concern, is if building E is pushed right up against the back of these properties here, you know, what is that going to do to a neighborhood that is pretty much had unchanged views of and just an unchanged street for the last 80, 90 years. And I know that may not be something that you guys have brought up or looked at yet, so it's okay if there's not an answer for that. That was my concern is, I wonder if all of a sudden these really nice old homes are going to have 40, 50 feet in the air behind them, a big old building right on the property line.
So if I might interject here for just a second. Now, I'm going on an assumption, so Ron, tell me if I'm off base. But when we talk landscape buffers, those are generally meant to be or to hide a lot of the visibility, you know, from neighbors. I would assume that most of those trees would not be small shrubberies, that they would be,
right,
you know, taller. And when you think about it, Andrew,
as well,
from where those houses are located, you're talking about 100 feet, maybe 125 feet from the back of the house to their property line. So from perspective sake, if the trees grow up some and they have some decent height to them, not hackberry height, but have some decent height to them, then a lot of that forced perspective will hide a majority of that building. You might see a roof, but it shouldn't like block out the sun and be the same as, say, a 16-story building would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's sort of why I was asking the pros, because I have my limits on understanding, which is why I asked. But cool.
Okay,
Well,
so Ron, if I've made an incorrect assumption, please correct me, but I just want to make sure that you know, we look at it from that context of what the landscape buffer's purpose is, and why it's important to make sure that it's done right.
Yes, and I also just wanted to point out, we had drawn this section from, you know, Gateway or Gatewood down because you could see the slope of the site, but it's not showing the same terrain, I guess. You can kind of see the contour lines. They fall down, so the low point of the site is on the southwest corner. So this street over here is a little bit higher up. So you also have that kind of working for us, where the buildings might be sitting lower than these houses. So that'll help a little bit, but the landscape buffer and the distance away should help that perspective.
Now, is the distance as far as where building E is located, is that something that's still apt to change to where all of a sudden we come back later and it does wind up being against the landscape buffer? Or is this pretty much sort of how it's going to be looking?
This is how this. So this is this when this site plan is approved, like the location of the buildings can't move.
Awesome.
If that answers your question.
Yeah, no, and then I guess part two is I know way back when I guess probably the first time you guys wanted to talk to us, you talked about really wanting to take the design of the building and the community into account. And maybe especially with these buildings A, B, sort of keep in mind that you're in an older historic neighborhood styled in a certain way and take that into consideration with the design of some of these homes to where you don't have a monolithic modern block next to a 1936, arts and crafts home.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and architectural elements and nice materials, especially that face Gatewood Avenue, will be really important to us. So that will be that the materials there will be predominantly brick, maybe a little bit of hardy, but for the most part it will be masonry. And I think we have some. Do we have the sort of inspiration slide, Ron? That we'll use for? No, I guess we don't. No.
Yeah, I don't think we have on the SP
So
document.
basically you're saying we're not going to have Frank Lloyd Wright meets Dolly in the way that these buildings are going to look.
No.
That's a huge relief. Thank you for at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Well, that definitely answers my question then. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
What do we got against Frank Lloyd Wright?
Not a thing. I love falling water, but some of his designs just don't really fit in our neighborhood, even though some folks try to make it.
Well, if they don't get the plumbing right, it will be falling water.
Falling water is a touchy subject here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's more like running water. It can fall, but then it runs, and that's the issue.
Yeah.
Cool. Trying to circle us back around to what we're actually talking about here. So were there any other points, Bo, that you wanted to kind of make based on conversations that we've had both with the community and with you directly, and then maybe we'll open it up back to some more comments or questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So I guess the only other thing we haven't discussed was landscape standards, and this was an item that Rachel brought up when we met, when we had our call last week. And so what's shown on this current plan is more street tree density than we had initially. So we've reduced the minimum spacing from 50 feet to 40 feet. We have increased the size of each street tree from a 2-inch caliber, which is what's required by Metro, to a 3-inch caliber. So it's larger, healthier, and has a better chance of survival and growth rate. Additionally, we're going to prioritize the use of native plants within the interior lot landscaping areas and planned buffer areas. And all that's on page 9 of the ST, which we will circulate. Stacey, if it's all right, we'll send this around to you. Actually, you already have it, so I guess if you wouldn't mind sharing with.
Are you talking about
the other
this
folks?
full SP, the however many pages it is?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually in our Facebook group in the files section. Okay.
Yeah. So page 9, we've added some, just sort of beefed up the landscape, landscaping that we'll do. But that was it. As far as items on my list to discuss.
Okay, so if that's that, then I'll just run a quick list down or a quick look down the list here and see if there's anybody that wants to make any other comments. Amanda's iPhone, that's how it shows up here. Did you have any other comments or questions about this particular plan?
Yes, thanks for asking. This is Zach. We live right off of Gatewood, about 2 blocks away. And I was curious, and I apologize if this was already touched on at the beginning. I joined just a few minutes late, but Do we have an expected breaking ground date, an expected completion date? And I'm assuming with the scope, the size of this project, there's going to be blasting, and curious to see if there's any type of, I am a little concerned if there is going to be blasting, that if there's going to be any ramifications to nearby, building foundations. I manage the property across in Germantown where they built the library, and we dealt with blasting for a year on a daily basis. And we found that there was foundation issues with our property that it just caused quite a bit of headache for us, but curious about that. And then lastly, we already confirmed that there aren't any lights being implemented with the project, street lights or red, green lights, what have you. But is there anything being done to mitigate this soon to be influx of traffic? If we're about to have 270 something units, I'm assuming once fully occupied, that's going to be close to maybe 350 plus, depending on how many 2 bedrooms, how many couples there are. But anything to mitigate the influx of traffic that is going to be going down what is an already tiny street, Gatewood, between that and the apartments next to it?
Yeah, good question. I'll start to answer that and let Bo kind of talk about schedule and construction and blasting and stuff. But the Luton connection was one of the big requirements based on the Highland Heights master plan to essentially help with future circulation too. So we basically had to build a public street right through the middle of our site, which we're okay with. But that was kind of one of the big keys to our to the plan, actually. So we looked at different orientations and cut throughs of that street, every different version of it, and incorporating the master plan and the feedback from the city too is kind of how we settled on, from a high level perspective, the location of the street and the location of the buildings.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James. And then just to answer some of your first questions. So, ideally, we're able to break ground before the end of the year. It would take approximately 20 months to complete the project. And with regards to blasting, that's a great question. I wish I knew, and like every other developer, I wish I knew exactly what was underneath the ground before I was able to buy a site, because it would make our budgeting and our help us sleep a lot better. But it's impossible to know until we get there. We can tell you this: so we've done 26 borings. We've drilled holes all around the site, and we haven't found rock anywhere that would require blasting, which is good because it's expensive and something we really try to avoid. So that, based on what we know now, that is not something we'll have to do, and we hope that's the case. But we would just have to see once we started digging and got out there if something showed up that would require that. So I hope that's not the case, but you just never know until you get out there.
Well, that's promising. Thank you.
Zach, if I could just add to that, and this isn't going to happen immediately, but the intention is over the next few years, as properties develop to the south of this project, that Luton Street extension is intended to run all the way down to Marie. So that should help alleviate traffic congestion at Gatewood for people waiting to turn left or right. And also, since Luton Street goes all the way up to Trinity, that is another outlet that people can use so hopefully any impact for Gatewood would be contained just within that short distance to Meridian or to Dickerson. Hopefully that won't be a huge impact, because they'll also have that drive that connects to Dickerson direct. So there are opportunities to help alleviate the traffic. Eventually there will probably need to be a stoplight at Gatewood, but whether or not it's located at Gatewood or one street up or one street down is yet to be seen.
Hi, this is Ray. I have a question, maybe it's for Stacy. I don't know. You guys probably don't deal with it, but do we have any idea of when they're going to start evicting those families that live up there? That trailer park full of families?
I have not heard, but I would think that would be dependent on, has the property changed hands yet, Bo?
It has not. It hasn't. So
No.
that would be,
All right. Well, I'd like to see, I'll do it on my own, but I'd like to see about contacting one of the social services folks that deal with Latino workers and families and stuff, and sort of put them on the head, because I don't know where the families are going to go. And I don't know about you, but they're in my community. So I sort of feel a sense of responsibility to at least try to reach out and help them relocate.
Sure. Sure. No, I think what, that's one of the things we're excited about the project is it adds density. It adds just a lot of housing units along a highly trafficked corridor, which is what Metro has in mind for this corridor and this site. So we are creating a net increase in housing units that aren't available, in the neighborhood right now.
Well, certainly it wouldn't be available to the folks that live there now. So it's creating a different kind of neighborhood different from who lives there. And I just, I'm paying attention, and I think our neighborhood does as well.
Okay, so going on down the list here, Jeanette, you've unmuted. Did you have a question?
No. I've just been listening.
Just making sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Eddie, did you have a question or a comment for Bo and his team?
No, thanks. I would like to know more about what you mentioned earlier about the extension all the way to Marie at some point, but just because I live on Marie. But I don't have any questions. I'm excited about this development, and anything that happens to Dickerson, I'm excited about.
Okay, well, we can certainly, if you want to drop me a note or we can set up a time to talk about it. But yeah, the extension all the way through to Marie is part of the mobility plan in the study that we did. So is it on this that you're showing us here? Yeah. It won't be completed until those other properties that front Dickerson change hands. So if it's a large development, say of this scale, that's occupying several of those, they have to, just like Bo and team, they have to build the extension down as far as their property lines go. We can discuss that in more detail personally. Just let me know when you want to talk.
Cool, I appreciate it.
Okay, let's see who else we have. I think that's got most everybody online. Did I skip anybody? I think that's everybody that's on the meeting. If I skip somebody, I apologize. We had 11 at one point. Now I'm only seeing 9, so somebody may have had to drop off.
You said the property hasn't changed hands yet. Do you know when that's expected to happen and how we'll find out about it if this project's going to come to fruition?
So we would, ideally we close, 30 days after the entitlements are put in place. And so that's our goal. And our hope is for that to be, that's to be in May. But we still have several, we go in front of the Metro Planning Committee, and then we go through the council schedule as well. And so there's still some uncertainty there. But ideally, 30 days after we get our entitlements, at the very beginning of June.
Great, thanks.
And just so that, Zach, I can walk you through how to monitor the progress and such, but typically it goes before Planning Commission, which you're slated for the 25th. So that's a week from Thursday, correct? Slated for the 25th for that meeting. And after that, the bill will be submitted to council and it has to be read at 3 different council meetings. Usually it's first reading, then 2 weeks later is the second reading, 2 weeks later is the third reading. Public comments can be made at the second reading. And after that, it becomes approved by the council, barring any kind of delays or sidelines that these guys aren't anticipating. Then, that would be May timeframe. I think. And then 30 days after, yeah, June. But that's the steps that it would go through.
Understood. Thanks.
All right. If no one else has any other comments or questions, I'd just like to thank Bo and his team for joining us, and for those from the neighborhood that have joined the call as well to learn more about the project and voice any concerns or comments. Bo, I hope this was fruitful for your team. And if nobody else has anything else, I think we're pretty much done here.
Sounds good. Stacy, thank you for putting this together. If anyone else has any further questions, I guess, Stacy, can they reach out to you, and then feel free to funnel them my way?
Always.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that sounds
That's
good.
why I'm paid the big bucks to be chairperson of the neighborhood association, you know.
I like it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.